I think one of the bigger stories, of course, we have the fact that the Houthi rebels are trying to go after our warships. I've got all the latest on that story for you as well. There's been a lot of reaction to this interview between Dana Bash and squad member Pramila Jayapal, the progressive squad member who really was tap dancing around some surprisingly difficult and tough questions posed by Dana Bash about Hamas. I want you to listen very carefully because this may be a sign of a turning point, as perhaps anyway, maybe some in the media are finally beginning to realize the atrocities that happened on October 7th. Listen closely to this question from Dana Bash.
It wasn't even an actual hard ceasefire. They were just trying to get another day, and Hamas wouldn't comply. So what makes you think that Hamas would comply with a longer-term ceasefire? Yeah,
she's talking, again, Pramila Jayapal. And we noted here on Nashville's Morning News, okay, so the ceasefire, I think this was on Thursday or Friday, but, the ceasefire finally officially over, which was fine because Hamas kept breaking the ceasefire anyway. And so Dana Bash is asking this Pramila Jayapal about the ceasefire and the fact that Hamas clearly was not respecting the ceasefire. The two sides were literally trying to come to an agreement about Hamas releasing all of the women and the children. But they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't send over a list of names of hostages that they would release. And instead, what Hamas did was they tried to start a new discussion regarding elderly men. That is one of a number of different ways as to why the ceasefire came to an end. Because Hamas reneged on their conversation regarding releasing the hostages of women and children, instead wanted to engage on a new conversation regarding elderly men. And at the same time, you had Hamas firing rockets into Israel in the last hours of the ceasefire as the two sides try to get back to the discussion table, the negotiation table. And Hamas, by the way, as you know, if you were listening to this show, they claimed responsibility for those two brothers. I think it was 2 or 3 brothers that arrived outside Jerusalem and opened fire on a bunch of innocent Israelis. So let's face it, Hamas and not Israel. Hamas sabotaged and did not respect the ceasefire, while you have all of these knuckleheads like Pramila Jayapal screaming for a ceasefire. But this is the answer from Jayapal.
It's not clear to me from the reporting who was to blame for...
you don't believe the Biden administration, that Hamas...
Well, I just think it's very complicated.
Young women?
I think it's very, very complicated.
Have you noticed, by the way, that when you start to call people who support Hamas, when you call them on the fact that they are literally supporting terrorists, they always say, oh, it's complicated. Have you noticed that? It's complicated. There's nothing complicated about what happened on October 7th. And there's nothing complicated about what Hamas is doing right now with the human shields and the raping of women and so forth. And by the way, some more details on that aspect of the atrocities coming up. But here's more from Pramila Jayapal.
In these negotiations, everybody wants something. And I think Qatar has said that Hamas is still at the table. Israel should still be at the table. In fact, some of the hostages the Israeli hostages are saying that Israel should still be at the table because this is complex negotiation and it doesn't happen unless both sides are willing.
So again, both sides were willing until one side, Hamas, simply stopped respecting the ceasefire and stopped respecting the negotiations and pulling their cooperation and changing the negotiation points midway through. But again, remember, because she does this a couple of different times in this interview, which did make a lot of news over the weekend and this morning. Whenever you get to the heart of the brutality of Hamas and their unwillingness to negotiate in good faith, her answer is, well, it's complicated. It's really not. Both sides were at the table, but Hamas broke the ceasefire and stopped negotiating in good faith. Hashtag not complicated, folks. Now, remember, you have all of these nut jobs out there saying give ceasefire a chance, yet at the same time, Hamas has said ad nauseum, they'll never stop.
You are hearing from Hamas leaders over and over again that the brutal massacre of the 1,200 Israeli civilians was just the beginning, just a rehearsal. They want to continue to do it over and over again. So a ceasefire would keep that brutal terrorist regime in place in Gaza.
Yeah. I mean, well, welcome to the land of common sense, Dana Bash. Again, in this surprisingly direct, and I would say I was surprised, it was somewhat confrontational. Because I think Dana Bash is finally seeing what the rest of us have been saying for a long time, which is when you scream for ceasefire now, it is anti-Semitic. Because they know, and I know, and you know, and certainly Hamas knows, that they won't stop until every Jewish person is killed. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. You listen to this show, so you know exactly what that means.
I don't think that's true. I think that what is true is that Hamas needs to be taken out. It is a terrorist organization.
How would you do that?
But I think the way to do that, as many terrorism experts have said, is to create a durable and strong coalition of allies within the Middle East, with the United States, with Israel, to make sure that we have a long-term political solution, that there is an alternative to Hamas to lead in Gaza and to establish a state for Palestinians. This is, I mean, we have to condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. We cannot allow for 15,000 Palestinians to date to have been killed.
And so clearly what she's doing is she's sort of, admitting, okay, yeah, what Hamas did was bad. But let's look at Israel. I mean, that's obvious what Pramila Jayapal and her ilk have been doing. Now, I don't know how she can sit here and say that she doesn't believe that these atrocities are clearly, it's true that Hamas will not stop. When they have said they will come out and they've said just that they won't stop until every Israeli, every Jew is dead. And that has been very consistent with their behavior, not just since October 7th, but for years. So once again, the Democrats and Pramila Jayapal refuse to accept the reality on the ground that Hamas will keep killing until they themselves are killed. And I will remind you that back in October, and we reported this at the time, that Jayapal voted present on a House resolution supporting Israel in the wake of the Hamas attacks. Present. After 1,300 people brutally killed, all kinds of women raped as that attack was going on. And so the interview took a decidedly horrific turn after that, because Jayapal was actually asked about rape and how these Hamas, whatever you want to call them, terrorists, these Hamas terrorists used rape as part of their attack. The interview between Dana Bash and Pramila Jayapal really took, I think, a horrific turn. And I do wonder if this really is going to be one of those moments where people start to see the absolute absurdity of the ceasefire now people, the ceasefire now crowd. Now, who knows about, one, the true numbers of casualties, because we all know that, yes, the folks over there in Hamas, they lie about the numbers. And even if the numbers are, as she was saying, 15,000 dead, she also understands that Hamas uses these folks as human shields, right?
International humanitarian law says that you cannot attack a hospital unless there are some circumstances. If rockets are fired from that hospital, that is one thing. But hospitals are protected. We have had refugee camps that are bombed. Right now, there are even the only pediatric hospital in Gaza is not operating. If we want to defeat terrorists, we have to abide by international humanitarian law. That is just my fundamental belief.
Yeah, that's what she says, although she has apparently not much, if anything at all, to say about Hamas not following any kind of rules of war, of course, because they're Hamas. But she keeps going back to the Israelis in all of this and doesn't seem to accept the actions of Hamas. But then when Bash really goes after this progressive Democrat about rape, that's when things really took an ugly turn. Bash asked her directly about it, and she said, yes, rape is horrendous and rape is bad, but she keeps going back to Israel and the 15,000, she says, that have been killed at the hands of Israelis. And while she stops kind of sort of short of defending Hamas and their culture of rape and rape being utilized as a weapon of war, she keeps going back to Israel.
Morally, I think we cannot say that one war crime deserves another. That is not what international humanitarian law says.
Okay, with respect, I was just asking about the women, and you turned it back to Israel. I'm asking you about Hamas. In fact,
I already answered your question, Dana. I said it's horrific, and I think that rape is horrific, sexual assault is horrific. I think that it happens in war situations. Terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians. 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping.
Well, Dana, I think
women.
we're not. I don't want this to be the hierarchy of oppressions.
Wow. Unbelievable. And you know what? I hate to say this because I've been a very big critic of Dana Bash, but, you know, when she says, you know, I don't see Israeli soldiers raping women, well, that's true. Swift and strong reaction to the comments of Pramila Jayapal from both sides of the aisle. It's easy if you're a conservative to go after what she said, but Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Christine, tweeted this out. Do not minimize, excuse, or balance or both sides sexual assault. She says that is victim blaming. She says we have spent decades trying to undo these kinds of laws. The courts in the hearts and the minds of people, tweeted Christine Pelosi on Sunday afternoon, an apparent slight aimed at Pramila Jayapal. Prominent cable commentator and Democratic attorney Dave Ehrenberg responded to Jayapal by writing this: when you tie yourself into knots to defend rapists, you've lost your moral authority. Hashtag rape is not resistance. Multiple members of the media saw Jayapal's, this is from the Associated Press, segment with Dana Bash and offered their criticism of the progressive lawmakers' wishy-washy stance on terrorists employing rape as a weapon of war. Fox News Democratic strategist Jessica Tarlov tweeting out Jayapal's position beyond messed up, adding that any primary challenge she faces will be well-deserved. So I do wonder, and I don't know, I do wonder if here in America, we are finally starting to see how horrific some of these ceasefire now people really are.